2014, Malaysia. The sky above Kuala Lumpur shimmered in the early morning darkness, still heavy with the humidity of the tropics. At precisely 12:41 a.m., Malaysia Airlines flight MH370, a Boeing 777 bound for Beijing, rolled down the runway and climbed into the black expanse of night. 239 souls were on board, passengers, crew, strangers, and loved ones, each carrying their own stories, dreams, and quiet fears. None of them could have known that they were embarking on a journey that would vanish from the map and from history, leaving only a trail of whispers and unanswered questions. For the first 38 minutes, nothing was unusual. The aircraft climbed steadily, passing through the humid cloud layers, slicing into the high, cold altitudes above the South China Sea. Voices crackled over the radio, routine exchanges between the cockpit and air traffic control. The last known words came from the co-pilot. "Good night, Malaysian 370. Calm, unhurried, almost mundane. But what happened in the moments after that radio transmission would mark the beginning of one of the most chilling aviation mysteries of the modern era. Just minutes later, the plane's transponder, the device that broadcasts its location to radar, went dark. Civilian air traffic control lost the aircraft entirely. But military radar still saw something. MH370 had turned sharply to the west, cutting across the Malay Peninsula, heading for the vast emptiness of the Indian Ocean. This was not a mechanical failure. This was deliberate. The world didn't know it yet, but MH370 was now flying a ghost route, severed from its intended path, like a vessel slipping silently into uncharted waters. When the airline announced the loss of contact, panic spread through airports and homes. Families clutched their phones, refreshing news feeds that gave only contradictions and confusion. Search planes took off, but their eyes saw nothing, only endless ocean and heavy clouds. Meanwhile, strange reports began to trickle in. A Thai radar operator saw the blip make several erratic turns before disappearing. Fishermen claimed to see bright lights racing across the horizon. And in a small atoll in the Maldives, locals reported hearing a deafening roar in the sky, far from any usual flight path. Hours turned into days, days into weeks. Every search grid drawn on a map seemed to end the same way, in blue emptiness. But then came the satellite data. Engineers studying faint handshakes between the aircraft and an Inmarsat satellite concluded that MH370 had flown south, deep into one of the most remote stretches of ocean on Earth, before plunging into the water. Yet there was no wreckage, no life rafts, no bodies. The sea had swallowed everything whole. And as the void persisted, the theories began to grow. Some whispered about a fire on board, choking the cabin with toxic smoke, the pilots turning west in a desperate bid to find an airstrip. Others spoke of hijacking, perhaps political, perhaps personal, that had gone terribly wrong. And then there were the darker possibilities. A pilot's suicide, a mass murder carried out silently at 35,000 feet, or even something beyond human explanation. For every official explanation, there were fragments that didn't fit. Why had someone disabled communications in stages, as if following a plan? Why did the aircraft's altitude fluctuate wildly during its westward turn? And most disturbing of all, why, in an age of satellites and instant communication, could a modern airliner vanish without a trace? By the end of the first month, MH370 had transcended its status as a missing flight. It had become a ghost story. Families described waking in the night to hear phantom phone calls from their loved ones' numbers, unanswered rings that left only silence. Search crews reported feelings of being watched over the ocean, despite the emptiness. And in one unsettling case, a sailor claimed he had seen a large metallic shape resting just beneath the surface of the water, miles from any official search area, only for it to vanish when he returned the next day. The weeks stretched into months. The official search teams scoured vast swathes of the Indian Ocean, deploying ships, aircraft, and deep-sea sonar, but the sea gave nothing back. It was as though MH370 had been erased from reality. In the absence of physical proof, speculation filled the vacuum, and speculation has a way of breeding shadows. One of the most unsettling aspects was the handshake data. These automated signals, detected by the Inmarsat satellite, were the only proof that the aircraft had remained aloft for nearly 7 hours after losing contact. The idea that 239 people had been alive, or at least aboard, for such a long, silent journey gnawed at investigators and families alike. What had been happening in those hours? Were they conscious, terrified, aware that their path was leading into nothingness? Or had they been unconscious from the start, their bodies drifting through the sky like passengers in a flying tomb? And then came the rumors. People claiming to have spotted large, white fuselage debris floating off the coast of Sumatra, or strange oil slicks in the Maldives. Reports emerged of villagers in the Andaman Islands hearing a deafening explosion in the early hours of March 8th. None of these were confirmed. None could be. But each added a layer of unease, as if the truth were out there, just beyond reach, taunting everyone who searched. The official investigation dragged on, but behind the scenes, other, darker narratives began to take shape. Some pointed to Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, the flight's veteran pilot. He was an experienced, methodical man, perhaps too methodical. Investigators discovered that his home flight simulator contained a route eerily similar to MH370's final suspected path, a turn into the southern Indian Ocean, ending in a dead-end stretch of water. To some, this was proof of premeditation. To others, it was coincidence, twisted into a sinister shape by grief and suspicion. There were whispers, too, of geopolitical intrigue. Was the plane carrying something, or someone, that powerful forces didn't want to reach Beijing? Some theorists noted that 20 employees of a high-tech company specializing in advanced semiconductors were on board. Could the plane have been intercepted or diverted by a state actor? And if so, why had no one claimed responsibility? The absence of answers fed the hunger for stranger explanations. A few voices on the fringes began speaking of time slips or dimensional anomalies, the possibility that MH370 had not crashed at all, but passed into some other realm, lost not in space but in time. Stories emerged of fishermen who claimed to have seen an impossibly large aircraft silently gliding low over the water, glowing faintly as if lit from within, before vanishing into the mist. These tales were dismissed by authorities, but they stuck in the minds of the families. Many reported vivid dreams in which their loved ones were alive, calling for help from a place they could not describe, a place with no sky, no sea, only endless, echoing corridors. Some even claimed to have heard knocking sounds on their walls in the dead of night, in groups of 3, repeating over and over as if in a pattern. The first physical debris would not appear until more than a year later. A flaperon, confirmed to be from MH370, washed ashore on Réunion Island in the Indian Ocean. It was weathered, worn smooth by the sea, but it raised more questions than it answered. How could a piece of the aircraft travel thousands of kilometers from the suspected crash site? Where was the rest of the wreckage? Why had no bodies ever been found? The discovery reignited the search, but the ocean remained a graveyard of secrets. In the years that followed, more fragments surfaced: a wing flap in Tanzania, interior panels in Mozambique and Madagascar. Each was like a bone washing ashore from some unseen corpse. Yet the central mystery persisted: the location of the fuselage, the final resting place of the passengers, the reason for the flight's ghostly voyage. And there was something else. Among the debris, an independent investigator claimed to have found a piece with strange markings, what looked like deep, scorched streaks running in a pattern inconsistent with normal crash damage. He suggested it could have been caused by extreme heat, the kind generated not by an engine fire, but by some external force. His findings were quietly ignored by the official report. By 2018, the official search was called off. The case was declared unsolved. The families left in limbo. But the ocean is not a silent witness. Sailors continued to report strange phenomena in the area. Sudden bursts of static on their radios, GPS devices going dead for minutes at a time, and in one particularly haunting account, the distant sound of human voices carried over the waves, indistinct, overlapping, and impossible to pinpoint. Even now, more than a decade later, Flight MH370's shadow lingers. The numbers 370 have taken on an almost supernatural resonance, a shorthand for the unthinkable. For some, it is a story of human failure, of errors, cover-ups, and a tragic, preventable loss of life. For others, it is a story of forces beyond our comprehension, forces that pluck people from the sky and erase them without trace. And perhaps the most terrifying thought is the simplest one, that the aircraft lies somewhere in the deep, miles below the surface, intact, its passengers still strapped in their seats, preserved in the crushing cold, a silent kingdom in the darkness, waiting for the day it is found, or for the day it decides to be found. In the years after the disappearance, the world moved on, but the families could not. Many of them clung to the idea that their loved ones might still be alive somewhere. This hope was fed by an unnerving series of events. Cell phones belonging to passengers reportedly rang several times before going to voicemail, even days after the disappearance. Technical experts insisted it was possible for a phone to appear active if connected to certain networks, but the families swore that some calls rang for unusually long intervals, too long for a disconnected device drifting at sea. Then there was the Diego Garcia theory. Diego Garcia, a remote atoll in the Indian Ocean, is home to a secretive U.S. military base. Some theorists suggested the plane may have been diverted there, whether intentionally or accidentally. The reasons given range from the transport of sensitive cargo to the interception of a hijacked aircraft. Official statements from the U.S. and Malaysia flatly denied that MH370 had ever approached the area, but certain independent radar reconstructions placed the plane's path in a trajectory that could have made it possible. But the most unnerving accounts came from the ocean itself. Fishermen from the coast of Sumatra and the Maldives began sharing stories, always in hushed voices, of seeing a massive aircraft flying unusually low, with no navigation lights, on the very night of March 8th. One described a floating silence, no engine roar, no wind shear, just the eerie hum of something enormous moving through the night sky. Others claimed to have seen flickers of light inside, like the glow of cabin windows, before the craft vanished over the horizon. These sightings were dismissed as unreliable. Yet, in the absence of the wreck, they took on a life of their own. Some began to wonder if MH370 had been caught in something stranger, a freak meteorological or electromagnetic event. There were stories of rogue waves in the upper atmosphere, massive distortions of air currents capable of displacing radar and radio signals. Others whispered of far darker possibilities, experiments with advanced weapons, cloaking technologies, or devices that could warp the very perception of time and space. A retired investigator from Malaysia, speaking anonymously, once told a journalist that he had reviewed classified satellite imagery from the night in question. According to his account, the images showed a rapidly expanding sphere of energy in the vicinity of MH370's last known position, a phenomenon he claimed he had never seen before in decades of aviation work. He refused to elaborate further, only saying, "If the public knew what I saw, they would never fly again." Adding to the chilling undertone was the string of coincidences surrounding the passengers. There were at least 4 people traveling under stolen passports, a fact that baffled investigators when no credible terrorist link could be established. There was also a mysterious consignment of lithium-ion batteries in the cargo hold, declared safe but still suspected by some to be a fire risk. And then there was the fact that the final radar contact placed the plane in a stretch of airspace that is one of the least monitored on Earth, as if it had been steered directly into a blind spot. Even the recovered debris brought discomfort. Some fragments, found years later on remote islands, appeared to have been cleanly sheared off, their edges unnervingly smooth. This prompted theories of an in-air breakup, or of a far more surgical disassembly, the kind not caused by weather or ocean currents. As these theories swirled, a deeper fear began to take root, that MH370 had not been lost by accident, but had been taken. Taken by whom, or for what reason, was anyone's guess. Some whispered about powerful governments, others about forces beyond human understanding. The most haunted of the families didn't speculate at all. They simply stared at the sea, as if listening for something. And in the stillness of those lonely vigils, some claimed they could hear it. The faint hum of engines, somewhere just beyond the horizon, getting closer, then fading away again, like a ghost that never quite arrives. By the 5th anniversary of MH370's disappearance, the case had become a permanent wound in the global consciousness. Documentaries were made, books published, countless online forums devoted themselves to parsing radar traces and decoding the tiniest anomalies. But for every supposed breakthrough, the truth seemed to slip further away. In late 2019, an amateur researcher from Australia claimed to have identified the outline of an aircraft on satellite images taken just days after the disappearance. The location was deep within the Indian Ocean, near an undersea ridge. The shape was faint, ghostly, lying at an unnatural angle. It was quickly dismissed by experts as artifacting, a trick of light, shadow, and water currents. Yet the image spread online, igniting feverish debate. Some who studied it closely swore they could make out the curve of a wing, the jagged break of a tail section. Others said they saw something else entirely, a shadow beneath the supposed wreck, massive and indistinct, as if the plane were resting atop something alive. Around the same time, a group of private divers, operating far north of the official search zone, reported finding large metallic debris tangled in deep-water coral. They described a smooth, cylindrical surface and what looked like torn seating fabric. Before they could recover any of it, their vessel suffered a sudden, catastrophic electrical failure. The divers abandoned the area, and when they returned a week later, the debris was gone. The ocean floor was bare. Then there were the transmissions. A handful of amateur radio operators, the kind who listened to static-filled frequencies in the middle of the night, began picking up strange signals over the southern Indian Ocean. The signals were faint but rhythmic, repeating every few seconds, almost like a coded beacon. When slowed down and filtered, some claimed they could hear what sounded like human speech buried in the noise. Overlapping voices, speaking in multiple languages, cut with a low, mechanical hum. Theories ranged from simple interference to the chilling possibility that it was a distress signal still echoing from the lost aircraft. Not all the stories came from the sea. In 2021, a Malaysian businessman traveling in southern China claimed to have seen an airliner flying extremely low over a remote mountain range at dawn. He described it as silent, except for a deep vibration you could feel in your chest, and said its windows glowed faintly, as if lit by candles. He insisted the plane had no markings he could see, but that its shape matched a Boeing 777. His account was ridiculed by officials, but among the families of the missing, it became yet another shard of hope or horror, depending on who you asked. Whispers grew about the possibility of a ghost flight, a plane somehow trapped between destinations, repeating its final hours again and again in some hidden loop of time. This was fueled by isolated radar anomalies recorded years after the disappearance, brief, inexplicable blips resembling a 777, appearing over open ocean before vanishing without a trace. Authorities chalked them up to technical glitches. But those who believed swore the blips were sightings of MH370 itself, endlessly replaying its doomed path. Among the strangest threads was a report leaked from an unnamed intelligence agency. It described a confidential observation made by a classified surveillance satellite. According to the document, on March 8, 2014, just minutes after MH370's final radar contact, a faint heat bloom was detected in the middle of the Indian Ocean, followed by a sudden, localized drop in sea surface temperature. The satellite's infrared feed allegedly captured a pattern of light, concentric rings expanding outward, before everything returned to normal. The report ended with a single line, phenomenon unknown. For those who pored over the mystery, this detail became a key to their most unsettling theory, that MH370 had encountered something not of this earth. And yet, there was a quieter horror in the official explanations too. If the plane had simply run out of fuel and crashed, then the tragedy was mundane, but also far more chilling in its banality. It would mean that for hours, the passengers may have been trapped in a slow descent toward their deaths, isolated in the cold cabin, knowing there was no rescue, only the sea below. The truth, whether ordinary or extraordinary, remained hidden. The ocean had chosen silence, and in that silence, myths were born. By 2022, the search for MH370 had shifted almost entirely to the realm of private ventures and independent investigators. Oceanographers, former military pilots, conspiracy researchers, all drawn to the riddle like moths to a flame, pooled resources for deep-sea surveys. Some expeditions claimed small victories, sonar scans of the seabed revealing odd, geometric shapes lying in sediment, metallic fragments snagged on trawl nets. But none could be definitively linked to the missing aircraft. Each lead, no matter how promising, seemed to dissolve under scrutiny, as though the mystery itself resisted being solved. One of the most unsettling expeditions came from a collaboration between a European salvage firm and a Singaporean tech group. Using autonomous underwater drones, they mapped a deep trench thousands of meters down. In one section, they captured images of what appeared to be a massive fuselage-shaped object. The drone's feed showed curved metal, algae growth, and what looked disturbingly like the outline of windows. But before the object could be confirmed or marked for recovery, the drone's camera feed began to glitch, flashes of static, sudden blackouts. Then the signal cut completely. The drones were never retrieved. The incident was buried under non-disclosure agreements, but whispers leaked into online forums. Some claimed the footage, in its final seconds, showed not only the shape of an aircraft, but something else, a faint, glowing form hovering in the black water beside it, its contours shifting as though it were alive. At the same time, families of the victims began reporting a strange and deeply unsettling pattern. In the years since the disappearance, some had received anonymous packages containing personal items their loved ones had been carrying on the flight: a wristwatch, a scarf, a child's toy. The packages bore no return address, postmarked from various locations around the Indian Ocean. None of the items showed signs of prolonged exposure to seawater. The Malaysian authorities investigated but found no fingerprints, no DNA traces, no explanation. Then came the Mauritius transmission. In late 2022, an amateur radio enthusiast in Port Louis intercepted a narrowband frequency, carrying what sounded like a looping distress signal. It repeated at regular intervals, a sequence of tones, followed by static, then a faint voice whispering in English. When slowed and filtered, the words became clearer. 370 coordinates, please. The voice was faint, distorted, and carried a desperate tone that froze the blood of those who heard it. Experts dismissed it as an elaborate hoax. But the family members who listened swore they recognized the voice of the co-pilot. By now, the mythos around MH370 had outgrown the event itself. In bars from Perth to Kuala Lumpur, Sailors told stories of spotting an enormous aircraft drifting silently above the ocean on moonless nights, its lights dim, its engines humming at an unnatural pitch. Pilots whispered about picking up faint radar echoes that matched the dimensions of a Boeing 777, only for the contact to vanish midair. There were even tales from long-haul crews claiming to have glimpsed, high above the clouds, a dark silhouette keeping pace with them for miles before peeling away into nothingness. Some oceanographers began to speak, carefully off the record, about the Indian Ocean's acoustic anomalies. Hydrophones placed deep underwater to monitor seismic activity had, on several occasions, picked up sounds too regular to be tectonic, but too deep to be from any known vessel. One recording, made in 2016, captured a slow, pulsing beat followed by a single, resonant crash. When sped up, the pulses sounded eerily like the thrum of jet engines. Adding to the sense of dread were the psychological effects reported by some search crews. Divers who worked in suspected crash zones described overwhelming feelings of being watched, or of time stretching unnaturally during their dives. One diver claimed that his wristwatch ran 23 minutes slow after surfacing, an impossible discrepancy given the timekeeping precision of his equipment. Another insisted that while exploring a wreck-like structure, he heard muffled voices over his comms system, though no one on his team was speaking. By the end of that year, the investigation, official and unofficial, had fractured into camps. Some clung to mechanical explanations: electrical failure, fire, depressurization. Others believed in deliberate human action, whether hijacking or pilot suicide. But a small, growing number began to embrace the idea that MH370's fate might lie outside the boundaries of known science. They spoke of magnetic anomalies, dimensional rifts, and oceanic zones where radar, GPS, and radio signals bent or vanished entirely. And yet, through all the noise, one chilling constant remained: the ocean had kept its secret. Every lead ended in silence. Every clue dissolved into rumor. Every possible truth slipped away like water through open fingers. In early 2023, an independent ocean mapping initiative funded by several wealthy patrons announced that their latest scans had detected an anomalous metallic structure lying at a depth of nearly 4,800 meters. The shape, they said, was consistent with the fuselage of a large commercial aircraft. Excitement surged. This could be the breakthrough the world had been waiting for. But then came the details. The structure appeared to be completely intact. No signs of violent breakup, no debris field surrounding it, no scarring on the ocean floor from an impact. It was as if the aircraft had been gently placed there. And more disturbing still, when the scans were repeated just 2 weeks later, the structure was gone. The disappearance of something that size should have been impossible. The official explanation was that the original readings were a sonar ghost, a misinterpretation caused by equipment error. But members of the mapping team, speaking anonymously, insisted the object had been there, and that the surrounding seafloor bore subtle changes, as if something massive had shifted through it. Around the same time, a research vessel operating hundreds of kilometers away reported an inexplicable incident. Their sonar equipment captured a large, moving contact approaching from the deep, slow, deliberate, unidentifiable. When it passed beneath them, every electrical system on the vessel flickered, then cut out for exactly 1 minute and 13 seconds. In that silence, crew members claimed to have heard a low, distant rumble rising from the depths, like turbines turning far below. Stories like these became the lifeblood of MH370's afterlife, half dismissed, half whispered as forbidden truths. One in particular stood out, an account from a Filipino fisherman, who swore that during a calm dawn in the South Indian Ocean, he'd spotted an enormous shadow gliding just below the water's surface, heading west. He assumed it was a whale until he saw, faintly visible through the swell, the outline of wings. But perhaps the most haunting development came not from the ocean, but from a remote island in the Seychelles. A hiker exploring an abandoned weather station found a battered, salt-crusted emergency slide with markings matching Malaysia Airlines equipment. Stuffed into its folds was something that didn't belong, a laminated safety card from a Boeing 777, and on its back, written in smudged ink, were 3 words: "Don't search here." Forensic testing on the card yielded nothing conclusive. No usable fingerprints, no DNA. The handwriting was too degraded for comparison. Yet it reignited an old fear among the families, that someone knew exactly what had happened to MH370 and had gone to great lengths to ensure it remained hidden. Theories took on darker shapes. What if the passengers had survived the initial disappearance? What if they were somewhere still alive? The human mind balks at the logistics, but stories emerged. People on remote islands claiming to have met strangers speaking a mix of languages, wearing clothes decades out of date. Sailors telling of hearing faint cries in the wind while passing certain uncharted reefs. By now, even seasoned investigators admitted privately that the data left room for unconventional interpretations. One theory, rarely spoken aloud, suggested that MH370 might have slipped into an oceanic mirage. Not a visual illusion, but a geophysical anomaly where currents, magnetic fields, and atmospheric conditions combine to bend reality itself. In such a place, an aircraft might remain suspended in some half-state, present but unreachable. And if that were true, then maybe, just maybe, the plane had never really stopped moving. Because in the summer of 2023, multiple long-haul pilots reported the same unnerving event. During night flights over the Indian Ocean, their weather radar briefly displayed a fast-moving contact directly ahead, a contact that matched the dimensions of a Boeing 777, moving at commercial cruising speed. Seconds later, it was gone. No visual confirmation, no radio chatter, no transponder. Just an echo in the dark. By late 2023, the sightings had shifted from scattered, unconnected accounts to something more alarming, a pattern. Pilots across multiple airlines began quietly trading stories over layovers, describing how, on certain nights and in certain sectors of the Indian Ocean, a radar echo would appear alongside them for a few minutes, matching their speed and heading, before vanishing completely. In several cases, crews reported faint radio interference during these events, not static, but muffled human voices, speaking in fragments of English, Malay, and Chinese. One captain, with over 20 years of experience, claimed that during a Singapore to Johannesburg flight, his weather radar picked up what he initially assumed was another airliner at cruising altitude. He requested the other craft's identification from air traffic control, but ATC responded that no other aircraft were anywhere within 200 nautical miles. Then, through the faint hiss of the radio, came a voice. 70, please respond. The words repeated twice before cutting to silence. If these were fabrications, they were eerily consistent across unrelated crews. And they mirrored something even more disturbing that surfaced from the private sector. Raw satellite tracking data showing unexplained blips. 777-sized contacts that would appear briefly in isolated patches of ocean, sometimes hundreds of kilometers from any shipping lanes, before disappearing again. These anomalies were too fleeting to trigger public aviation alerts, but the technicians who saw them swore that some bore an uncanny resemblance to the final, erratic path of MH370. Meanwhile, the ocean itself seemed to be adding its own sinister punctuation to the mystery. In early 2024, researchers studying the Indian Ocean's abyssal plains picked up a repeating sonar signature at a depth of 5,000 meters, a slow, rhythmic pulse measured at exactly 1-minute intervals. This continued for 11 days before stopping abruptly. The frequency of the sound was within the range of certain mechanical systems, but unlike anything recorded from known submersibles or ships. When audio technicians sped up the recording, the pulses took on an unsettling timbre, like the far-off roar of twin jet engines. This was followed by one of the most infamous incidents in the search's shadow history. A private salvage crew working off the coast of Madagascar recovered a fragment of fuselage unmistakably bearing the Malaysia Airlines livery. But instead of turning it over to authorities, the crew contacted several journalists, claiming that the interior side of the panel was scorched in an irregular pattern, the metal warped inward, as though subjected to intense heat from outside. They also claimed to find what looked like handwritten numerals along one edge, 370, scrawled in what appeared to be marker pen. Before the story could be verified, the panel was confiscated by local authorities and reportedly sent to Malaysia. It has never been seen again. The case began to pull in those with reputations for chasing the impossible. Paranormal researchers, ex-intelligence officers, fringe scientists, each offered a theory more unnerving than the last. One claimed that MH370 might be phased, existing just a fraction out of alignment with our reality, occasionally slipping close enough to be glimpsed or detected before fading again. Another pointed to ancient mariners' tales of phantom ships that sailed the seas for centuries, crewed by the dead, suggesting that the same phenomenon could now haunt the skies. And then came the message. In May 2024, the family of a passenger reported receiving an email from an untraceable address. Attached was a low-resolution audio file, distorted almost beyond recognition. When cleaned up by audio technicians, it revealed what sounded like overlapping voices, heavy breathing, and a faint but chilling phrase repeated twice. "We are still here." Authorities dismissed it as a cruel hoax. But for those who had lived in the shadow of MH370's disappearance, it felt like the ocean, or whatever had taken the plane, had spoken directly for the first time. From that point, the sightings took on a more urgent tone. Ships reported being shadowed by an unlit aircraft that appeared in their night skies, gliding silently before banking sharply out to sea. Remote weather stations recorded sudden temperature drops in areas matching historical blip sightings. And more than one deep-sea probe was lost when operating near the suspected southern arc of MH370's final route. Its signal abruptly cut, the tether line found frayed as though scraped by immense, unseen machinery. Every lead still ended the same way, in silence. And yet, silence can be its own kind of noise, one that waits and watches and listens. By late 2024, even official channels could no longer pretend the case had gone cold. An unredacted internal memo leaked from an Australian maritime agency revealed that, during a classified sonar sweep, one of their deep-sea drones had returned unexpected imagery. A large, fuselage-shaped object lying at an impossible angle, half buried in the silt, nearly 4,900 meters down. The outline was eerily consistent with a Boeing 777, but when they cross-referenced the precise location with the raw satellite pings from 2014, it didn't line up. The position was wrong by over 2,000 kilometers. The team prepared a second dive to confirm the find, but before the drone could descend again, every single data feed from the vessel flatlined. The crew later claimed they were hit by a sudden, deafening vibration through the hull, like standing inside a giant engine. It lasted 49 seconds. When it ended, the sea was calm, but the backup drives holding the sonar images were corrupted beyond recovery, replaced with a black screen and a blinking white cursor. One technician swore he saw the cursor briefly form a shape before freezing, the outline of an airplane window. By early 2025, the story took an even darker turn. In January, a fisherman from the Andaman Islands posted a shaky video online, filmed just before dawn. In the grainy footage, an aircraft with no visible lights schemes low over the water, silent except for a faint metallic groan, and vanishes into a bank of fog. The fisherman's voice trembles as he swears the plane had no tail markings, but its silhouette was identical to that of a Malaysia Airlines 777. The video was online for 12 hours before it disappeared, along with the fisherman's social media accounts, phone number, and eventually the man himself. Locals claimed his boat was found adrift, nets still in the water, engine running. Then in March, the families of several MH370 passengers began receiving identical packages. Each contained an old-fashioned cassette tape and a single photograph, a blurred shot of what looked like the inside of a dimly lit aircraft cabin. The angle suggested the picture had been taken from one of the last rows, and in the gloom, you could make out the backs of passengers' heads. None of them moved. When one of the cassettes was played, it revealed a slow, rhythmic sound, the same one recorded by ocean researchers the previous year. But at the 37-minute mark, the pulse faltered, and a woman's voice whispered something almost inaudible. "Look outside, we never landed." For weeks, investigators and amateur sleuths tried to determine the origin of the tapes, but the trail led nowhere. The magnetic strip of each cassette showed signs of abnormal degradation, as though it had been exposed to extreme pressure or electromagnetic interference. The final known clue came on April 17, 2025. A weather satellite passing over the southern Indian Ocean captured a single frame of something massive breaking the surface. Not a wave, not a whale. It was metallic, curved, streaked with corrosion, and glistening under the morning sun. Analysts estimated it was at least 70 meters long. But the most unsettling detail wasn't its size. It was the row of evenly spaced black rectangles running along its side like windows. And in that single blurred image, two of those windows appeared to have faces pressed against them. Faces that looked alive. The image was released by mistake, posted briefly to a meteorological database before being scrubbed within minutes. By the time archivists retrieved it, the file had been altered, the object erased, the ocean blank. No official statement was ever given. The families still wait for closure that never comes. The search ships are gone. The satellite coverage is routine. But out in the southern arc, beyond the shipping lanes, there are still reports of strange blips on radar, unlit silhouettes in the night sky, and whispers on the radio that fade as quickly as they appear. If you listen long enough, some say you can still hear that woman's voice from the cassette, almost lost in the static. Look outside, we never landed. And when you do, you'll realize the most terrifying part of MH370's mystery isn't where it is. It's that it might still be flying.